Welcome back to Viral Shakespeare. This is Dr. Rusty Jones, and I am into Act 3 of Shakespeare's The Tempest for this lecture. And I wanted to talk for just a second with you all before I get into Act 3 about surveillance. Now, The Tempest is a Jacobean play, meaning that it was written and performed during the reign of King James I, who was King James VI of Scotland before becoming King James I of England. And that society was one of great surveillance. But before him, with Elizabeth I, this was a society that was under great surveillance because it was under great threat. Elizabeth was well aware of this. As a female monarch, she knew she was in a particularly tentative position, and so she was always on the alert, looking for something, some kind of plot against her, and there were many plots against her reign, and making sure that she remained steadfast and steady in her power. And she was willing to do what needed to be done to make that happen. We see some surveillance replicated in some of the plays from the period. For example, The Spanish Tragedy by Thomas Kyd, 1587. In that play, the figure of the ghost of Donna Andrea, who is murdered by the evil Balthazar, and a personification of revenge itself, both the ghost of Donna Andrea and the personification of revenge, watch the entire play of the Spanish Tragedy unfold before them, and they talk to each other as a kind of commentary body about what's happening, and they cast a kind of almost like voyeuristic surveillance pall over the entire thing, waiting for revenge to be executed on the evildoers and on some of the good people as well. The violence falls on them as well in that play. It creates a very eerie kind of surveilled feeling to that entire play. In 1600, a portrait is commissioned by Elizabeth I. It's known as the Rainbow Portrait. I encourage you to look that up if you want to. And in that portrait, Elizabeth on her dress has figures of eyes and ears on the dress itself, a suggestion that wherever you are in her society, she is going to be watching and she's going to be listening. And do not fall afoul of Elizabeth, because it can go very, very bad for you. This was a very surveillance-oriented society. Shakespeare also has his surveillors, he has his watchers, if you will. Christopher Sly in The Taming of the Shrew, that subplot that opens up The Taming of the Shrew. I have seen productions of this where, he gets drunk, they pretend that he's a monarch, and they say, we're going to put a play on for you, and they position him there on the stage, and the whole Taming of the Shrew is performed for Sly. He doesn't comment on it. We never hear from him again once it's set up. That's why the Christopher Sly subplot is often taken out of The Taming of the Shrew. And yet that is really a play within the play of Christopher Sly in this way, and he acts as a kind of watcher, surveiller of that particular work, and it takes on a kind of meta quality if you leave the Sly subplot in because of it. The nobles in A Midsummer Night's Dream, as they watch the rude mechanicals play in Act 5 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, they also act as watchers and commentators, but they talk to each other and they make fun of the play that's going on there. That also has a very kind of meta quality. We then watch them watch the play, and we are as concerned about the nobles' behavior as we are about the performance that's undertaken by the rude mechanicals. That's Bottom and company. Prospero in Act 3 of The Tempest is also a watcher. He watches the budding relationship that he himself has set up between Miranda and Ferdinand, and although it may seem a little like overreach, a little creepy for us to have this magician figure watching over the developing romantic relationship of his daughter, in some ways, Prospero feels a little bit more, to me anyway, like the chorus in Henry V, that inserts itself every now and again and acts like a kind of go-between between the action on the stage and the people out in the audience, almost like a kind of a Greek chorus that'll stop, comment for us on what's going on, and then move back into the action themselves. Although the chorus in Henry V doesn't actually participate in the action, they do act as a kind of commentary go-between between what is happening and what we are supposed to take away from it as far as the audience is concerned. So during the reign of Elizabeth, Donna Andrea, and Revenge, they feel like ever watchful, almost revenge figures themselves, just waiting for something terrible to happen. Prospero, anyway, presents himself, however you want to read this, as more like a kind of benign, fatherly presence, making sure that everything goes as he plans for it to go with the relationship between his daughter and Ferdinand. Now, it's problematic to link this to matters of gender necessarily and matters of monarchy and rule, and yet Elizabeth had very good reason to have figures like Don Andrea and revenge hovering over her own society, because the threats were extraordinarily tangible for, especially for a female monarch. And maybe it makes kind of a connection, if you want to go there, between Prospero and James I, because he is a male monarch. He has a little more security because of the fact of his gender, more so than Elizabeth had. And he is able to revisit this very old trope of the pater patriae, the father of the country, looking out for the best wishes of the family, meaning the nation that he rules. Also, as Prospero is deeply concerned with the matters of, procreation, I guess, for lack of a better term, and the continuance of his rule by making sure his daughter gets exactly the husband that he wants and making sure that that relationship is stable before taking them back to the old world so that he can reassert himself in Milan. It is thought that James too was much more concerned with procreation and with continuation of the line undisturbed of monarchy, more so than Elizabeth. People didn't know that Elizabeth was working behind the scenes to ensure that James, her second cousin, would take over after her death. But apparently, because she wouldn't marry, she was accused often of being very unconcerned about the continuance of the monarchy. James, although it was fairly well accepted that, in our terms anyway, he was homosexual, did get married, did have children, acted in the kind of fatherly role, and made sure that, like Prospero, everything was overseen so that there wasn't any concern over a disruption in the orderly succession of the monarchy line. So I thought I'd throw that out there before getting into Act 3. Now let's get into Act 3 itself. Check my time here. Okay, we're doing all right. And I'm starting in Act 2, Scene 2, just finishing off with Stefano, Caliban, and Trinculo. Act 2, Scene 2, about line 65 or so. Stefano says of Caliban, "This is some monster of the isle with 4 legs," because, of course, Trinculo's legs are also sticking out from underneath the gabardine. He hasn't been revealed yet. It looks like he has 4 legs. The more ridiculous and comical this is on stage, the better. "Who hath got, as I take it, an ague," a pain in his head. "Where the devil should he learn our language? I will give him some relief, if it be but for that. If I can recover him and keep him tame and get to Naples with him, he's a present for any emperor that ever trod on neat's leather." Again, the first thing in the old world European thought is, if I can just get this native person to Europe, I can make money off of him. There seems to be a kind of ironic, if not satiric, commentary there on old world greed and lack of humanity. "Caliban, do not torment me, prithee, I'll bring my wood home faster. He is in his fit now," says Stefano, "and does not talk after the wisest. He shall taste of my bottle. If he never drunk wine afore, it will go near to remove his fit." And he begins to feed Caliban wine, and that also feels like a kind of colonialist comment on the way that alcohol was given to the native peoples and the kind of detrimental effect it had on them. A little farther down by line 84, "This will shake your shaking," he says after telling Caliban to open his mouth. "I can tell you," and that soundly gives Caliban a drink. Finally, Trinculo identifies himself about line 98 and says, "If thou be a Stefano, touch me and speak to me, for I am Trinculo. Be not afeard, thy good friend Trinculo." And he pulls Trinculo out from underneath Caliban's cloak and says, "Thou art very Trinculo indeed. How camest thou to be the siege of this moon calf," meaning Caliban. "Can he vent Trinculos?" Vent means fart. So if you thought that Shakespeare was above a fart joke, he's not. Caliban continues to get drunk on the liquor provided by Stefano, who has secured an entire barrel of it from the sunken ship and has hidden it. And he keeps telling Caliban to, quote, as you see at line 127 or so, "kiss the book." which is a bit of a religious parody there. Instead of kissing the Bible and swearing on it, we are drinking, and Caliban gets drunker and drunker. Um, let's see, jumping forward a little bit, Caliban, line 145 or so, tells the two drunken idiots, Stefano and Trinculo, I'll show thee every fertile inch of the island, and I will kiss thy foot. I prithee, be my God. By this light, says Trinculo, a most perfidious and drunken monster. When God's asleep, he'll rob his bottle. I'll kiss thy foot, says Caliban, and I'll swear myself thy subject. Stefano says, come on then, down and swear. And everything that we heard from Caliban before with his relationship to Prospero, I showed thee all the fertile places of the island, and I worshipped you like my God, it's being repeated again. But now in a more kind of parodic, ridiculous, farcical context with Stefano and Trinculo. Trinculo a jester, Stefano a drunken butler. The power that was in Caliban's character as a kind of ironic commentary on the relationship between old world peoples and new world peoples is suddenly lost. To me, anyway, to my mind. And Caliban becomes, in many degrees, a kind of shadow of himself. And the relationship between him and Stefano and Trinculo becomes a kind of farcical parody of the relationship of Caliban, Miranda, and Prospero from earlier in the play. Stefano even points this out a little bit later in that scene, about line 169, where he says, I prithee now, lead the way without any more talking. Trinculo, the king, and all our company else being drowned, we will inherit here. To Caliban, here, bear my bottle. Fellow Trinculo, we'll fill him by and by again. And they move off in their drunken way. Act 3, Scene 1. Ferdinand enters bearing a log. I talked in the last lecture about the connection I see between Ferdinand bearing a log at Prospero's command so he can prove himself worthy of Miranda, and Caliban bearing the logs a little bit earlier as a kind of mirror threat to this relationship that Prospero wants between Miranda and Ferdinand versus the one that Caliban tried to thrust upon Miranda herself when he attempted to rape her. About line 7, Ferdinand tells us of Miranda, oh, she is 10 times more gentle than her father's crabbed, and he's composed of harshness. I must remove some thousands of these logs and pile them up upon a sore injunction. So I guess that's the test that he has to go through. Enter Miranda and Prospero behind unseen. This is the surveillance aspect that I was mentioning before. Everything that happens in the rest of this scene between Ferdinand and Miranda happens with Prospero just behind them, just off to the side, somewhere. We accept the convention that he's invisible. They can't see him. We can. He talks to us about what's happening. They can't hear him. We accept all of these conventions the way that we accepted it with Oberon in A Midsummer Night's Dream when he said, I am invisible and I'm going to listen and all the rest of that. We get it again. But here he's envisioning himself as the kind of noble patriarch, making sure that this succession occurs exactly the way that he wants it, in a benign way, although for us it might be a little creepy, as I mentioned. Alas, now pray you work not so hard, says Miranda. I would the lightning had burnt up those logs that you are enjoined to pile. Pray set it down and rest you. And they do, and they begin to have a long conversation. About line 31, Prospero says, of his daughter, poor worm, thou art infected. This visitation shows it. Ferdinand asks what Miranda's name is. Miranda says, Miranda, oh, my father, I have broke your hest to say so. Apparently her father had said, whatever you do, don't tell him your name and don't talk too much. You know, though he knows she's going to do both. And he doesn't have a problem with her doing both. But in her freaking out a little bit, saying, oh, I wasn't supposed to tell you my name, and a little bit later in the scene when she says, oh, I'm rattling on and my daddy told me not to do that, we see her edging toward maturity, breaking away from her father's behest, at least in her own mind, and asserting her maturity as a woman who actually wants this relationship. Meanwhile, Prospero's right there. And he's okaying all of this. And we get the sense that he has set the whole thing up. He's fine with it. These little rebellions that she's showing are not, in fact, little rebellions. They are totally orchestrated by Prospero himself. Ferdinand calls her admired Miranda. Indeed, the top of admiration, worth what's dearest to the world, and begins to praise her like crazy. Miranda then says at line 48, I do not know one of my sex. I've never seen a woman before. No woman's face remembers, save except for from my glass, my mirror, mine own. Nor have I seen more that I may call men than you, good friend, and my dear father. She's leaving Caliban out of this. How features are abroad, back in the old world, I am skillless of. But by my modesty, the jewel in my dower, I would not wish any companion in the world but you. Well, isn't that fortunate, since you've never seen any others? You assume he's the best. A little farther down, Prospero comments again to us, fair encounter of two most rare affections, he says at line 75 or so. Heavens rain grace on that which breeds between them. Heaven rain grace on that which breeds between them. And I think that word breeds is very purposely selected. He is interested in procreation and succession, as we'll see in Act 4. Miranda, intriguingly, at about line 82, is the one who proposes to Ferdinand. Hence bashful cunning, she says at line 81, and prompt me plain and holy innocence. I am your wife, if you will marry me. If not, I'll die your maid. To be your fellow you may deny me, but I'll be your servant, whether you will or no. Ferdinand's reaction is, my mistress, dearest, and I thus humble ever. That's a non-answer. So Miranda says, my husband then? I, with a heart as willing as bondage ever of freedom, here's my hand. And it's a match. Now, it is a little bit of a break in the rules for Miranda to ask him to marry. The man is supposed to do that, theoretically anyway. But it doesn't really matter. She doesn't understand the social conventions. She says it's done out of modesty, which it is, and she's the one that asks, and he says yes. Now, in Shakespeare's day, if two people are over the age of 12 and they both agree to get married and they have a witness, it is a legally binding contract. We see this in Romeo and Juliet. We see it again here, although there isn't a witness, but there also is Prospero, because he's there. So in their minds, it's legal and binding. In our minds, it's legal and binding. And the whole thing is set up exactly as Prospero wishes. He ends the scene by saying, so glad of this as they, I cannot be, who are surprised withal, but my rejoicing at nothing can be more. I'm great. I'll to my book, for ere yet supper time must I perform much business appertaining. He's got to go back to his magic books because there's one more bit of magic he needs to use if he's going to make this union that he has set up not just binding, but moral and ethically above board. There's one last thing that he has to do, which we'll get into next time. Jumping forward, Act 3, Scene 2, about line 86 or so, Caliban and Stefano continue to parody what we saw earlier in the play when Alonso has gone to sleep, and then Sebastian and Antonio, the evil brother of Alonso, and Antonio, the evil brother of Prospero, plot together to kill Alonso and company and then take their places back in the old world. Here, Stefano and Caliban begin to plot with each other, with Trinculo also listening, about killing Prospero and taking control of the island. So those old world machinations once again rear their head, but in this case a kind of parodic form because it's two drunks and a monster planning this overthrow here. They are planning to kill Prospero when he's asleep, but Caliban reminds them that although it is line 87, the custom with him in the afternoon to sleep, there thou mayest brain him, hit him, having first seized his books. Remember, first to possess his books, for without them he's but a sot, so I am, nor hath not one spirit to command. They all do hate him, the spirits, I assume, as rootedly as I, burn but his books. It's interesting to suggest that spirits like Ariel, for example, actually hate him. I don't know if Caliban is right or not, but it does cast a kind of, negative feeling on Prospero as this sort of benign, fatherly dictator of the island, depending on how you want to look at him. Caliban gets one last very famous kind of nod to what is potentially a sympathetic aspect of his character, even though he's turned into a kind of parodic drunkard at this point. Line 135 or so, Act 3, Scene 3. Ariel has cast music onto the stage. Not exactly sure why Ariel has done this, but Caliban says, when Stefano and Trinculo freak out, be not afeared. Don't worry about it. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that, if I then had waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then, in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again. Because when he wakes, his situation is so terrible. He wants to be back in that situation where the beautiful music of the island makes him think of the riches that are denied to him. And when he awakes, he knows he's nothing but a slave to Prospero's desires, where he gets tortured, and then he wants to go back and dream again. And suddenly, again, maybe Caliban becomes less of a joke and Prospero less of a kind of benign father. Shakespeare does go back and forth in this play. Act 3, Scene 3. Let me check my time here. Doing all right. Back with Antonio, Sebastian, Gonzalo, etc. And again, Prospero appears at line 18. Prospero on the top. Again, he is organizing the next entire situation that happens. And Gonzalo at line 19 or so says, marvelous sweet music. Then you have a long stage direction. Enter several strange shapes, bringing in a banquet, and dance about it with gentle actions of salutations, and inviting the king, etc., to eat. They depart. So Prospero has used his magic, and you've got these magical figures that come in and set up a beautiful banquet for the starving Antonio, Sebastian, Alonso, Gonzalo, etc. And they're absolutely stunned. And as they debate whether or not they should actually eat this magical feast or not, just as they're about to do it, at line 52, it's yanked away from them magically. Thunder and lightning is the stage direction. Enter Ariel like a harpy. Claps his wings upon the table, and with a quaint device, whatever quaint machinations those are, the banquet vanishes. Now, Prospero has done this. To me, it just feels cruel. Now, yes, Antonio is not the nicest brother in the world. Both he and Alonso have plotted against Prospero, but he's torturing them here. They're starving, wandering this island. Oh, here's a beautiful banquet. Boop, it's gone. And Ariel, like a harpy, then torments them some more. A harpy is this Greek classical figure, half woman, half, I don't know, like sort of crow, bird creature, whose job it is to torment the wicked, which is exactly what Ariel does. Disguised as a harpy, Ariel says, you are three men of sin. That's leaving Gonzalo out. Whom destiny that hath to instrument this lower world and what is in it, the never surfeited sea hath caused to belch you up. They draw their swords on this figure, and Ariel says, you fools, I and my fellows are ministers of fate, the sort of controlling, surveilling figure that Prospero also represents. The elements of whom your swords are tempered may as well wound the loud winds, or with bemocked at stabs kill the still closing waters. In other words, forget it. You cannot hurt me. Later, he vanishes. Enter the shapes again. They carry out the tables. So they are tormented by this figure of the harpy, who also says, in an interesting moment, which I'm currently searching for because I have not marked it. Yes, okay. Memory is what is used by, or what is evoked, I should say, by Ariel, the memory of what they did to Prospero. But remember, for that's my business to you, says Ariel the harpy at line 68, that you three from Milan did supplant good Prospero, exposed unto the sea, which hath requited him and his innocent child, for which foul deed the powers, delaying, not forgetting, have incensed the sea and shores, yea, all the creatures, against your peace. Thee of thy son Alonso they have bereft. You know, you've had your son ripped away, presumably dead, but not. And do pronounce by me lingering perdition, worse than any death can be at once, shall step by step attend you and your ways. The memory of your dead son will go with you step by step in the worst kind of torture, whose wraths do guard you from, which here, in this most desolate isle, else falls upon your heads, is nothing but heart sorrow, and a clear life ensuing. Prospero then compliments the work done here. Bravely the figure of this harpy hast thou performed, my Ariel. A grace it had, devouring of my instruction. Hast thou nothing bated in which thou hadst to say? So with good life and observation strange, my meaner ministers their several kinds have done. My high charms work. And these mine enemies are all knit up in their distractions. They now are in my power, and in these fits I leave them, while I visit young Ferdinand, whom they suppose is drowned, and his and mine loved darling. In other words, the torments that Ariel has inflicted upon them have made them mad, have rendered them, as Prospero says, distract, and he leaves them in their madness to wander aimlessly about the isle until he feels it is the moment to bring them forward to him, to hear of their transgressions again, and, in the case of the Tempest, to be forgiven, as opposed to, say, the Spanish tragedy, where if they were brought forward and their transgressions read before them, the figure of Donna Andrea the ghost and the personification of revenge would make sure that it ended badly. Well, this isn't going to end badly. It's going to end well. The power of forgiveness being foregrounded late in Shakespeare's career. So, that's Act 3 of The Tempest, and we will move into Act 4 on Wednesday, finish the play off on Friday. Be safe.